The morning light filtered through the crystalline panels of Kryonar University's most prestigious lecture hall. Unlike the traditional academic institutions of Earth, this amphitheater followed the strict three-tier seating arrangement that had become standard across all Kryonar facilities. Red cast members occupied the front rows, their muscular frames and crimson skin tones glistening under the artificial lights. Yellow cast members filled the middle section, their slender bodies and golden complexions reflecting their diplomatic and emotional intelligence specializations. And, at the top, the blue cast members sat with perfect posture, their azure skin and enlarged craniums housing the analytical minds that had propelled Kryonar civilization to interstellar dominance. Professor Salahir adjusted his formal academic robes as he prepared the touch-sensitive display board for today's lecture. Despite having taught at the university for 15 Earth years, he still felt a flutter of anticipation before addressing such a distinguished audience. Today's topic was particularly contentious: human biology as classified weaponry. The room hummed with low conversations as students settled into their designated areas, the physical separation between castes as obvious as the genetic modifications that define their roles in society. Salahir watched as the last students filed in, noting the careful way they avoided physical contact with members of different castes. The segregation wasn't merely social convention. It was codified in Kryonar law, reinforced through generations of selective breeding and genetic enhancement. Red castes were engineered for physical prowess, yellow for emotional intelligence and diplomatic acumen, and blue for pure intellectual capacity. It was a system that had served them well, until they encountered humans. "Good morning," Salahir began, his voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. The conversations ceased immediately, all eyes turning toward him. Today, we continue our xenobiology series with what might be our most controversial subject yet: the classification of unmodified human biology as a weapon of war. A ripple of discomfort moved through the audience. Several red cast members shifted in their seats, their enhanced muscles tensing visibly. From the second row, a particularly imposing student raised his hand. Salahir recognized him immediately. Zahir, one of the most promising military strategists in the university. "Yes, Zahir? You have a question before we've even begun?" Salahir asked, one eyebrow raised in amusement. Zahir stood, his 7-foot frame towering over his peers. "With respect, Professor, I find the premise of today's lecture fundamentally flawed. Humans are physically inferior to even our most basic red caste members. Their reflexes are slower, their strength significantly less. How can such a species be classified as a weapon when a single Kryonar soldier could defeat multiple humans in physical combat?" Several of Zahir's fellow red caste members nodded in agreement, their expressions showing a mixture of pride and disdain. Salahir had anticipated this response. It was precisely the kind of thinking he hoped to challenge today. An excellent opening question, Zahir, one that cuts straight to the heart of our misconceptions. Salahir tapped the display board, bringing up a three-dimensional model of the human form. "Who else shares Zahir's assessment? Show of hands, please." Nearly every red caste member raised their hand, along with a significant portion of the yellow and blue castes. Salahir nodded, mentally noting the distribution. "I see. Then today should prove illuminating for most of you." He expanded the model, zooming in on the human endocrine system. "Let's begin with something simple: the human fight-or-flight response, centered around a molecule called adrenaline, or epinephrine. The molecular structure of adrenaline appeared beside the human model, rotating slowly. When a human perceives danger, their adrenal glands release this compound into their bloodstream. The effects are immediate and profound: increased heart rate, dilated air passages, and, most relevantly to Zahir's point, a temporary but significant increase in physical strength and speed. Zahir frowned. Temporary chemical enhancements don't constitute a weapon. Professor, by that logic, our performance-enhancing drugs would make us even more formidable. Indeed they would, Zahir, if they were naturally produced by your body without external intervention, Salahir countered. But let me continue before we debate that point further. Salahir expanded the display to show a comparison between human and cryonar muscle tissue. Human muscles operate at approximately 30% efficiency under normal conditions. This is a biological safety mechanism. Allowing their full potential would risk tearing tendons and breaking bones. But under the influence of adrenaline, these inhibitory mechanisms are partially bypassed. He pulled up historical footage from Earth's archives. There are documented cases of humans lifting vehicles weighing over 2 tons to rescue trapped individuals, breaking through concrete walls with bare hands, and surviving falls that should have been fatal, all under the influence of this naturally produced compound. The footage played, showing a slight human female lifting the corner of a ground vehicle to free a trapped child. The audience watched in silence, several Blue cast members leaning forward with analytical interest. But this is just the beginning, Salahir continued. The true classification of humans as weapons comes not from any single attribute, but from a unique combination of traits that, together, create something far more formidable than the sum of its parts. He changed the display to show a network of human social connections. Let's move beyond the physical for a moment. Humans possess what they call pack bonding, an ability to form deep social connections, not just with members of their own species, but with virtually any entity they encounter. This trait evolved as a survival mechanism on their homeworld, allowing them to domesticate predators into protectors and work animals. A yellow cast member in the middle section raised her hand. Professor Salahir, I am Mihara, specializing in xenodiplomatic relations. How does this pack bonding differ from our own social structures? Salahir nodded appreciatively at the question. An excellent point of comparison. Mihara, cryonar social structures are highly regulated and caste-specific. Your yellow caste excels at diplomatic relations precisely because you've been engineered for emotional intelligence. But your bonds are primarily with other yellow castes. And while you can work effectively with red and blue castes, there remains a biological and social separation. He brought up images of humans with various earth animals, riding horses, working alongside dogs, swimming with dolphins. Humans, by contrast, form genuine emotional attachments to creatures with whom they share almost no genetic similarity. They anthropomorphize, attribute human characteristics to, everything from simple robots to weather patterns. This might seem irrational, but it grants them an extraordinary advantage. They can integrate and cooperate with virtually any species they encounter. Salahir paused, letting the implications sink in. In essence, where we see potential resources or threats, humans see potential allies. Their first instinct upon meeting a new species is often to attempt communication and cooperation rather than dominance or avoidance. From the upper section, a blue cast member with an unusually large cranium raised his hand. Uhari, Cognitive Analysis Division. He introduced himself. Professor, you're suggesting that this tendency toward cross-species bonding provides humans with strategic advantages. But surely it also creates vulnerabilities. They might extend trust where caution would be more prudent. Indeed. Uhari. That is sometimes the case, Salahir acknowledged. But consider the statistical outcomes of this approach across human history. For every instance where their trust was betrayed, there are dozens where they gained loyal allies. Earth's historical records show that human civilizations that embraced diversity and cooperation typically outperformed those that remained isolated or hostile. Salahir shifted the display again, this time showing human brain activity. Now, let's address the intellectual capacity that our blue caste members might be most interested in. While the average human brain may not match the computational abilities of a blue caste cryonar, human cognitive function has two noteworthy characteristics. He highlighted different regions of the human brain. First, their neural plasticity, the ability to rewire neural pathways throughout their lifespan, far exceeds our own. Where cryonar brains become increasingly specialized and efficient, but less adaptable with age, humans retain significant neuroplasticity well into their later years. A murmur of surprise rippled through the blue caste section. This was evidently new information to many of them. Second, Salahir continued, human cognitive abilities follow a bell curve distribution with extremely wide tails. This means that while the average human might not impress a blue caste member, their population produces individuals with cognitive abilities that would be considered statistical impossibilities in our more homogeneous species. He displayed profiles of several historical humans: Alan Turing, Albert Einstein, Emmy Noether, and others. These individuals made intellectual leaps that revolutionized their understanding of the universe. Some, like those with savant syndrome, possess cognitive abilities in specific domains that exceed even our most specialized blue castes. Uhari spoke again without raising his hand, a breach of protocol that highlighted his agitation. But these are anomalies, Professor, statistically insignificant. Are they? Salahir asked. Consider this. In a population of billions, even a 1 in a million cognitive outlier means thousands of individuals with exceptional abilities. And human history demonstrates that it often takes just one such individual to change the course of their civilization. Zahir stood again, his expression now more curious than dismissive. Professor, you've addressed physical capabilities under stress and cognitive outliers, but these seem like exceptions rather than rules. How does this justify classifying the entire species as a weapon? An excellent transition, Zahir, Salahir said with a nod of approval. Let's move on to perhaps the most remarkable aspect of human biology, their adaptability and endurance. The display shifted to show humans surviving in various environments across Earth, from Arctic tundra to scorching deserts, from mountain peaks to underwater habitats. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme environmental variation. As a result, they can survive and function in a wider range of conditions than almost any other known sentient species. He pulled up comparative physiological data. Humans can acclimate to temperatures ranging from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius with minimal technological assistance. They can survive without water for approximately 3 days, without food for 3 weeks. They can lose up to 40% of their blood volume and still recover. Their immune systems can adapt to new pathogens with remarkable efficiency. A red caste student from the back row called out, "But Professor, these are just survival traits, not weapons." Salahir smiled, having anticipated this objection. Consider, if you will, the military implications of such adaptability. A species that can operate effectively across virtually any planetary environment without extensive technological support. A species that can sustain significant physical damage and continue functioning. A species that can rapidly develop immunity to biological weapons. He paused, looking around the room. Now, combine this adaptability with their physical capabilities under stress, their intellectual potential, and their ability to form alliances with other species. What emerges is not just a collection of impressive biological traits, but a uniquely dangerous combination that exceeds the sum of its parts. The lecture hall had grown unnaturally quiet. Students from all 3 castes were now paying rapt attention, their earlier skepticism giving way to thoughtful consideration or, in some cases, visible concern. Salahir continued, his voice more measured now. There's another factor that makes humans particularly dangerous: their evolutionary history as persistence hunters. He displayed footage of traditional human hunters, tracking prey across vast distances. Before humans developed advanced weapons, they hunted by simply following their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. This requires not just physical endurance, but psychological persistence, the ability to maintain focus on a goal over extended periods despite setbacks and hardships. Zahir's expression had grown increasingly serious. "You're suggesting that humans would simply outlast us in a conflict?" "In many scenarios, yes," Salahir confirmed. Human military history is filled with examples of technologically inferior forces prevailing through superior endurance and adaptation. They have a saying that encapsulates this approach: improvise, adapt, overcome. Where Kryanar military doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force and technological superiority, humans excel at asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and psychological operations. A yellow caste member near Mihara raised her hand. "If humans are so formidable, why haven't they dominated the galactic stage? Why did they agree to the terms of the Kryanar alliance, rather than challenging us directly?" "Another excellent question," Salahir said. "And this brings us to perhaps the most important point of today's lecture. Humans are not just classified as weapons because they are dangerous. They are classified as weapons because they are dangerous in ways that are fundamentally unpredictable to non-human intelligence." He brought up a complex decision tree on the display. Kryanar strategic AI can predict the actions of most species with 97% accuracy based on resource availability, threat assessment, and historical behavior patterns. With humans, that accuracy drops to below 60%. Uhari leaned forward, his analytical mind clearly engaged. "What accounts for this discrepancy, Professor?" "Several factors," Salahir replied. "First, humans frequently act against their apparent self-interest in ways that seem irrational, but serve complex social or moral principles. Second, they demonstrate what they call lateral thinking, approaching problems from unexpected angles rather than through linear optimization. Third, they place high value on concepts like freedom and self-determination that sometimes outweigh survival or resource maximization in their decision-making." He looked around the room, making eye contact with students from each caste. "In essence, humans don't play the game of interspecies relations according to the established rules. They rewrite the rules, change the board, or sometimes flip the table entirely and suggest a different game." The tension in the room was palpable now. Salahir could see that his points were resonating, perhaps too effectively. He needed to balance the picture before concluding. "However," he continued in a more reassuring tone, "it's crucial to understand that humans' classification as weapons does not necessarily make them enemies. In fact, the same traits that make them dangerous also make them extraordinarily valuable as allies." He displayed footage of human emergency responders rushing into burning buildings, human doctors working tirelessly through epidemics, human aid workers in disaster zones. Their adaptability, endurance, and pack-bonding instincts make them exceptional partners in crisis situations. Their cognitive diversity generates innovative solutions to complex problems, and their persistence ensures they don't abandon allies when circumstances become difficult. Mihara raised her hand again. "Professor, given everything you've presented, why did the Galactic Council specifically classify human biology itself as a weapon, rather than just acknowledging humans as a potential military threat like any other species?" Salahir nodded appreciatively. "The classification stems from a unique aspect of human development. Unlike most advanced species, humans achieved interstellar capability without significant genetic self-modification. Where the Kryanar and most other spacefaring species use genetic engineering to optimize our biology for specific functions, humans remained remarkably close to their evolutionary baseline." He brought up comparative genetic data. This means that the capabilities I've described today aren't technological enhancements that could be regulated or restricted. They're intrinsic to every human. You cannot separate a human from their weapon potential without fundamentally altering what makes them human. Zahir stood once more, his expression now one of intense concentration. Professor, you've presented compelling evidence for individual human capabilities. But there's something you haven't addressed directly. What happens when humans work together? If a single human can be dangerous, what about their collective potential? A silence fell over the lecture hall. Salahir looked at Zahir with newfound respect. The student had identified the very question he had been building toward. That, Zahir, is precisely the question that led to their classification as weapons in the first place. Salahir's voice had grown quieter, forcing everyone to listen more carefully. When humans coordinate their efforts, something remarkable happens. Their individual variability, rather than creating inefficiency as it would in our society, becomes a source of extraordinary adaptability and resilience. He displayed a complex network diagram showing human social structures across multiple scales, from families to global organizations. Human societies simultaneously operate at multiple levels of organization. They form tight-knit local communities while maintaining larger regional identities and global cooperation networks. This multi-scale organization allows them to respond to threats with both local flexibility and coordinated large-scale action. Uhari raised his hand again. But surely this complexity creates inefficiencies and conflicts within their own societies. Absolutely, Salahir agreed. Human history is filled with internal conflicts, sometimes devastating ones. But paradoxically, these conflicts have often driven their most significant advancements. Their technologies, social systems, and philosophical understandings have frequently emerged from periods of intense competition and challenge. He paused, considering his next words carefully. In many ways, humans have integrated conflict into their development process in a way that we, Kryanar, with our emphasis on stability and optimization, find difficult to comprehend. They don't seek perfect solutions. They iterate, experiment, and learn from failure. The lecture hall had grown so quiet that Salahir could hear the faint hum of the environmental systems. Students from all three castes seemed lost in thought, processing the implications of what they'd learned. Finally, Mihara broke the silence. Professor, you've shown us why humans are classified as weapons, but you haven't addressed the most important question. What should our response be to this classification? Should we fear them, ally with them, attempt to control them? Salahir smiled, pleased that the conversation had reached this critical junction. That, Mihara, is indeed the most important question, and one that has divided the Galactic Council for decades. Before I offer my perspective, I'd like to hear from you all. Based on what you've learned today, what approach would you advocate? Zahir spoke first, his voice more measured than before. From a Red Caste perspective, the traditional response would be containment and monitoring. If humans truly represent the biological weapon you've described, allowing them unfettered access to galactic resources would be irresponsible. Uhari countered immediately. Containment would be logistically impossible, given their adaptability and persistence. Any attempt to restrict them would likely trigger exactly the kind of resourcefulness and determination that makes them dangerous. Logical analysis suggests that integration and alliance offer better probability of positive outcomes. Mihara nodded in agreement. The yellow caste perspective aligns with Uhari's assessment. Our diplomatic protocols are built on the principle that potential adversaries should be converted to allies whenever possible. Humans' pack-bonding tendencies make them particularly receptive to genuine alliance offers. A heated discussion erupted across the lecture hall, with students from each caste offering perspectives based on their specialized training. Salahir allowed it to continue for several minutes, observing the unusual sight of all three castes engaged in direct debate, a rare occurrence in Kryanar educational settings. Finally, he raised his hand for silence. Your points are all valid, and they reflect the ongoing debate within the Galactic Council. Now, let me share with you the perspective that led to my specialization in human studies. He cleared the display board and replaced it with a simple image, a human hand and a Kryanar hand clasped together. The classification of humans as weapons was not, as many assume, intended to justify their containment or control. It was a recognition of reality, an acknowledgement that we had encountered something unprecedented in our exploration of the galaxy. Salahir moved away from the display, walking closer to the students. But in focusing on the potential threat, many of our leaders missed a crucial opportunity. If humans are indeed weapons, then the question becomes not how to defend against them, but how to ensure they're on our side. He looked directly at Zahir. The red caste values strength and protection. Humans have demonstrated a willingness to fight and die not just for their own kind, but for any species they consider allies. His gaze shifted to Mihara. The yellow caste values emotional intelligence and diplomatic skill. Humans' ability to form bonds across species boundaries makes them natural diplomats in interspecies conflicts. Finally, he turned to Uhari. And the blue caste values knowledge and innovation. Humans' cognitive diversity generates novel solutions that even our most advanced AI systems cannot predict. Salahir returned to the center of the stage. In short, humans complement the Kryanar in ways that no other species can. Their very unpredictability, the trait that makes them most dangerous as potential adversaries, makes them invaluable as allies in a galaxy filled with unknown threats. The students were silent, absorbing his words. Then, unexpectedly, Mihara stood and addressed not Salahir, but the entire room. What if the real lesson here isn't about humans at all, but about us? Our caste system was designed to optimize our species through specialization, but it also created limitations. Perhaps by allying with humans, we gain access not just to their unique abilities, but to a different way of organizing society altogether. A murmur of surprise, and in some cases, discomfort, spread through the lecture hall. Mihara's suggestion struck at the foundation of Kryanar social structure, challenging assumptions that had gone unquestioned for generations. Zahir stood as well, looking at Mihara with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Are you suggesting we should abandon the caste system? Generations of selective breeding and genetic engineering have optimized each caste for specific functions. Dismantling that structure would create chaos. Uhari joined them, his analytical mind already exploring the implications. Not necessarily chaos, but certainly disruption. However, biological systems often find new equilibria after disruption. If human society can function with their level of individual variation, perhaps there are alternative models worth exploring. Salahir watched with growing amazement as students from different castes began to engage directly with one another, breaking the usual protocol of addressing comments through him as the lecturer. Something unprecedented was happening, a spontaneous cross-caste dialogue, sparked by their consideration of human potential. After allowing the discussion to continue for several minutes, Salahir gently reclaimed the room's attention. I see that today's topic has inspired some revolutionary thinking. Before we conclude, I want to emphasize one final point about why human biology is classified as a weapon. Perhaps the most important point of all. The room quieted, all eyes returning to him. The true power of humanity, the reason they are considered weapons, is not found in any individual trait I've described today. It is found in their capacity for transformation, both of themselves and of those around them. He gestured toward the animated conversation that had just taken place. Look at what has happened in this room today. In discussing humans, you began to question the very foundations of our society. You engaged across caste boundaries in ways that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of this lecture. This is the human effect. They change the dynamics of any system they enter, often without deliberately trying to do so. Salahir's expression grew more serious. The Galactic Council classified humans as weapons not because they pose an imminent threat, but because they represent a force for change. And while our civilization has achieved remarkable stability through specialization and optimization, we must ask ourselves, is stability always the highest goal? Or is there value in controlled transformation, in evolution, rather than mere preservation? The question hung in the air as the lecture period neared its end. Salahir could see that he had given his students much to consider, perhaps more than he had intended. For your next assignment, he said, I'd like each of you to research a specific human innovation or adaptation and analyze how it might complement or challenge our cryonar approaches. Work in cross-caste groups of 3, 1 from each caste, to ensure multiple perspectives. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Cross-caste academic collaboration was rare, typically reserved for graduate-level research. Salahir was deliberately pushing boundaries with this assignment, and he knew it would not go unnoticed by university administration. As the students gathered their materials to leave, Mihara approached the front of the lecture hall, followed by Zahir and Uhari, representatives from each caste, moving together. Professor, Mihara began, we have a question that wasn't addressed in the lecture. Go ahead, Salahir encouraged. You've explained why humans are classified as weapons, but you haven't told us how you personally came to study them with such appreciation. Most cryonar xenobiologists approach humans as subjects to be analyzed, not potential partners. Salahir smiled, appreciating the perceptiveness of the question. A fair point. My perspective was shaped by direct experience. Before joining the faculty here, I spent 10 Earth years embedded with human scientific communities. What began as a research assignment became something more. I found myself forming the very pack bonds I described today. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a simple bracelet made of woven fibers, distinctly human in its craftsmanship. This was given to me by a human colleague when our research station faced a crisis. We worked for 72 consecutive hours to contain a biohazard outbreak, and in that time, I witnessed firsthand the adaptability, persistence, and collaborative spirit I've described today. Salahir's expression grew distant, recalling memories. When the crisis was resolved, my human colleague told me that we were now family, not a term cryonar used lightly. As you know, I initially dismissed it as a human emotional excess, but over time, I came to understand that they meant it literally. They had psychologically recategorized me from other to kin. The 3 students exchanged glances, processing this personal revelation. That's why I believe the classification of humans as weapons misses a crucial point, Salahir continued. Yes, they are potentially dangerous, but more importantly, they are dangerous on behalf of those they consider allies. And they extend that circle of alliance more readily than any species we've encountered. Zahir frowned. But how can we trust such fluid loyalties? If they bond so easily with others, those bonds might be shallow, easily broken. A reasonable concern, Salahir acknowledged. But human history suggests otherwise. Their most enduring institutions and principles often center around loyalty and commitment, even when such loyalty comes at great personal cost. Uhari, ever analytical, posed the next question. If your assessment is correct, Professor, then the optimal strategy would be to ensure humans view cryonar as worthy allies. How do we accomplish that? Salahir smiled. That, Uhari, is precisely the question that should be driving our policy decisions. And the answer is both simple and challenging. We must be worthy allies. Humans value reciprocity, fairness, and authenticity in their relationships. They can detect insincerity with remarkable accuracy. Mihara nodded slowly. So, the Galactic Council's current approach of limited engagement and careful monitoring may be counterproductive. Salahir finished for her. It signals distrust, which humans are likely to reciprocate. A more open, collaborative approach, while carrying certain risks, offers greater potential rewards. The four of them stood in silence for a moment, the empty lecture hall around them a fitting backdrop for ideas that challenged established Kryanar thinking. Finally, Zahir spoke, his voice unusually subdued. Professor, I came to your lecture believing I understood the threat humans posed. I leave with more questions than answers, but also with curiosity. Perhaps that is the most dangerous weapon humans possess, their ability to make even a red-caste Kryanar curious about possibilities beyond our structured society. Salahir laughed, a warm sound that echoed in the large room. Beautifully put, Zahir. And if that curiosity leads to cross-caste collaboration, like I'm seeing among you three, perhaps the human influence is already working its transformation. As the students prepared to leave, Salahir gathered his materials, reflecting on the session. He had hoped to challenge his students' preconceptions about humans, but he hadn't anticipated the immediate effect it would have on their interactions with each other. The spontaneous cross-caste dialogue was unprecedented in his teaching experience, a small but significant crack in the rigid social structure that defined Kryanar civilization. Perhaps, he thought, the classification of human biology as a weapon wasn't entirely wrong, but like many weapons, its impact depended entirely on how it was used. In the right context, the disruptive potential of humanity could be exactly what the galaxy needed, not to destroy existing structures, but to transform them into something more adaptive, more resilient, and ultimately more capable of facing whatever unknown challenges lay ahead. As Salahir watched Mihara, Zahir, and Uhari leave the lecture hall together, still deep in conversation despite their different castes, he allowed himself a moment of optimism. The future of Kryanar-human relations remained uncertain, but today's lecture had planted seeds that might someday grow into something remarkable, a true alliance based not on fear or necessity, but on mutual recognition of complementary strengths. The official classification of human biology as a weapon had been intended as a warning. But in Salahir's view, it should be interpreted as an opportunity, a recognition that in humanity, the galaxy had gained not just another intelligent species, but a catalyst for evolution that might benefit all who chose to embrace rather than fear it. He powered down the display board and headed toward his office, already planning the next lecture in the series, Human Creativity as Evolutionary Algorithm. That one, he suspected, would challenge his blue caste students even more fundamentally. He smiled at the thought. After all, if humans had taught him anything, it was that the most significant growth often came from the most uncomfortable challenges. And perhaps that, more than anything else, was why human biology had been classified as a weapon. Not because humans themselves were inherently dangerous, but because the change they inevitably brought with them threatened the comfortable stasis that so many species, Kryanar included, had mistaken for progress. True progress, Salahir had learned from his human colleagues, was messier, less predictable, and infinitely more vital than the carefully controlled optimization that characterized Kryanar advancement. And if embracing that messier, more dynamic form of progress meant reclassifying humans from weapons to partners, then it was a change he would gladly advocate. As he left the lecture hall, Salahir touched the woven bracelet on his wrist, a simple human craft that represented a complex human truth. Bonds formed across difference could be stronger than those formed through similarity. Diversity could be a source of strength rather than inefficiency. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the universe was exactly what you needed most. The door closed behind him, but the conversation he had started continued to echo through the minds of his students. A small disruption in the Kryanar system that might, like a human innovation, grow into something transformative. Only time would tell whether that transformation would be embraced or resisted by the wider Kryanar society. But Salahir had made his choice. He would continue to be an advocate for the weapon that was humanity, not despite its disruptive potential, but because of it. After all, in a universe of unknown threats and challenges, adaptability might prove more valuable than stability, and no species in the known galaxy adapted quite like humans. Salahir smiled as he imagined future generations of Kryanar students, learning not about human biology as a classified weapon, but about the Kryanar-Human Alliance that had transformed galactic civilization. It was a future worth working toward. One lecture, one mind, one small disruption at a time. The journey would not be easy. Centuries of Kryanar tradition and biological specialization would not change overnight. But if humans had taught him anything, it was the power of persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And with representatives of all three castes now engaged in the conversation, the first steps had already been taken. Perhaps someday, the classification of human biology as a weapon would be remembered as the beginning of a new understanding, not of human potential for destruction, but of their unmatched capacity for creation, connection, and change. Until then, Salahir would continue his work, bridging the gap between species, just as his lecture had temporarily bridged the gaps between castes. One class at a time, one mind at a time, until the potential he saw became reality. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in many years, Salahir felt genuinely optimistic about what that future might hold, for humans, for Kryanar, and for the galaxy they shared. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful weapon of all: hope.